Hi there, Charisma. Let's take a look at your essay today. Okay, let's see. The first one is about the rainfall. Here's what you wrote. The line graph gives information regarding the amount of rainfall in England, Scotland, and Wales from January to December 2018. Overall, we can see that the amount of rainfall in England, Scotland, and Wales, despite some fluctuations, remained relatively constant over the period. Really? That's what we can see? I don't know how accurate that is because I see this chart as being like one of the most varied and volatile that I probably have ever seen. So I don't know about it remaining relatively constant. I think that there's tons of fluctuations and they're really dramatic fluctuations. So I don't really know how accurate that statement is. Also remember that when you're describing this, you should describe it in such a way that the person can visualize what you're looking at. So if I were trying to do this with my mind's eye, I would probably think like, oh yeah, there's some little like hills and little bumps, but it's probably pretty consistent. And that's really not the case here. Okay? So in the first quarter of 2018, Scotland accounted for the most fluctuations in rainfall, ranging from the low of approximately 25 ml to a high of 140. Then in the final quarter of 2018, it fluctuated again from 140 to just 50. So those are really big fluctuations, really. However, the rainfall volume in England showed only a slight fluctuation, with mostly over 100 ml throughout the period, except for the month between May and June, wherein the volume of rain accounted for approximately 75 ml. But then by the end of 2018, it then registered to the maximum level of rain when almost reached to 130. Okay. All right, moving on. In early 2018, the rainfall amount in Wales was the lowest among these three countries. However, it dramatically experienced the largest quantity of rainfall, representing 145 in July. The most striking difference can be noted from August to October, wherein I would have just said when, really. Wales has had approximately 50, below 50 of rainfall compared to over 100 rainfall in England and Scotland. Okay. I want to look at this again. The good news is that your grammar is great. Your vocabulary is great. So all of that is really good. If I have any concern here, it's about your details. This is a tricky task one because there's 36 pieces of information. So the question then becomes, well, what do I select? Clearly, you can't select everything. Clearly, you have to pick and choose what the most important parts are. I'm always a big fan of talking about the beginning, talking about the end, and then talking about maybe some of those key highs and lows, and then using a range to talk about everything else, or some sort of like a ceiling number, like to put a cap on things. You kind of did that, but I do want to look at it one more time to make sure that you did pinpoint some of the key pieces of information. So now, for example, one thing that I thought was kind of strange is that you talked about the first quarter of 2018. And then you talked about the last quarter of 2018, but you never told us what happened in Scotland for those 6 months in between. Now, in England, you gave me a few pieces of information, but I don't really know where it started out during in the beginning of the year. You said it was mostly over 100, and then you told me where it was between May and June, and then you told me at the end of the year it reached here, 130. So I have some information about England, but I don't really know where the year started out for England. Let's see. And then I know where Wales started. I know where it peaked in July. And then let's see, I know where it was in August and October. So I kind of felt like you picked some of the most important information, but there are still a couple of question marks. Like I don't know where the data began or where it ended for a couple of the areas, and then for some others I have like a whole huge question mark for about half the year. So like I said, you clearly can't talk about everything, but you should try to select some information so that a person could at least kind of approximately draw what it is you're looking at. All right, you did a pretty good job of this, and like I said, I was really happy because the language part of the answer was really good. However, I still think that you might have been able to write a little more detail about some of those key periods of the graph, okay? Alrighty, so let's take a look at your task 2. This is the one about having children and getting married in your 30s. Here's what you wrote. Experts throughout both the developed and developing countries, get rid of the. So experts throughout both developed and developing countries have debated whether getting married later is more beneficial or harmful in our modern society. I firmly believe that giving birth and settling down later in life have undoubtedly higher chances of making better decisions. What? That doesn't make sense. Let's try it again. I firmly believe that people giving birth and settling down later in life have undoubtedly higher chances, because it's the people who have higher chances of making better decisions, not the giving birth. This essay will discuss both sides using examples from the New Zealand government and Harvard University to demonstrate points. Fine. Okay. There is ample evidence that supports the idea that when most people get married in their 30s, they are stable emotionally, financially ready, and mentally prepared. The central reason behind this is twofold. Firstly, most people at this stage have stable jobs that can provide basic requirements to build a loving relationship. Secondly, most of them have basically encountered various challenges that made them better prepared in difficult situations of marriage. For example, recent empirical research by the New Zealand government demonstrated that the success rate of marriage increased by as much as 75% in couples who settle down in their 30s. It must not be forgotten that there must be a combination of emotional readiness and readily available financial resources to further create enormous stability of the union. Therefore, it is conclusively clear that there is a considerably strong case to be made in favor of couples who have children in their 30s and are more satisfied in their overall relationship. Okay, so one thing I'd like to see here, Charisma, is when you have your main idea, where was it? Here, the central reason. I felt like what you did here is you had main idea, and then you had support. I'd prefer to see main idea, its support, and then main idea, and then its support. It's a much more logical organization here, and I would like to see you revise this so that it indicates that each piece of support follows directly the main idea that it is describing, okay? Now, this whole paragraph was about marriage, okay? It was about loving relationship, difficult situations of marriage, settled down, etc., etc. And then all of a sudden, you throw in this element of having children in their 30s, which to me felt kind of irrelevant, because the whole way through as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, okay, well, Charisma is going to write a paragraph talking about marriage in one's 30s and then a paragraph about childbirth in one's 30s. But then you kind of threw me for a loop here when you mentioned children here. So I now don't know how you're going to develop your next paragraph. So let's take a look at it actually, okay? Although there was a case for early marriage favoring society. Now, I don't know why you're bringing this up, because you never talked about that in the previous sentence, in the previous paragraph, rather, excuse me. This kind of structure would make sense if you had developed this argument in the previous paragraph, but you didn't. So, I don't know about this sentence at all. Let's look at it a little bit again. Although there was a case for early marriage favoring society, the impact of an emotionally and psychologically ready, is that the word that's missing? Emotionally ready couple or prepared couples cannot be overstated. This is largely because couples who got married in their 20s have been together during difficult times and grew to build a relationship together. For instance, an extensive study, careful with your D here, by Harvard University showed that over 60% of early marriages ended up in divorce. Consistent with this line of thinking is that a considerable amount of people are longing in the social life outside of marriage. I don't understand this. Are longing for, since the responsibility of taking care of the children immediately took over after settling down. Thus, it is possible to state beyond doubt that the consequences of divorce have a tremendous impact among family members. This is a little confusing to me. Let's look at the topic again, all right? Here we go. You're supposed to talk about whether it's positive or negative to get married and have children in your 30s? Is it positive or negative? So here you talked about how it's clearly positive for the relationship, and I understood that. That was no problem. But then here, I felt like you were talking about the wrong thing. You're talking about how it's negative to get married in your 20s, but that's not what you're supposed to be talking about. You're supposed to be focusing on getting married in your 30s. You're not talking about getting married in your 30s and whether it's positive or negative by talking about what's bad about getting married in your 20s. Does that make sense? I hope it does. So I feel like your focus here is on the wrong thing. You should be focusing only on getting married and having children in your 30s. And quite frankly, I feel like there is just not enough about having children. I felt like this whole paragraph dealt with marriage, okay? You mentioned children once here, and then all of a sudden you mentioned taking care of children here. But there really is no focus on having children or even getting pregnant in your 30s anywhere in the essay, not just in the paragraph. So that part of the essay is really underdeveloped for me. Okay? So yeah, this whole paragraph is problematic for me. And then all of a sudden you start talking about divorce, which I didn't understand. Like, why are we suddenly talking about divorce? You said something that people are longing for a social life outside of marriage. So I don't know. I mean, it just doesn't really feel like a well-structured paragraph in terms of the topic development and in terms of the cohesion of your ideas, okay? All right, let's move on. From the arguments S and examples given, I firmly believe that although starting a relationship early provides S longer time to create a union in our lives, the role of mental stability and financial readiness is much more essential. Okay, that's fine. I would have liked you to make this a little clearer, saying that this could be accomplished in one's 30s and not quite so much in your 20s, or just something. Remember to bring back this idea of this is only possible once one reaches his or her 30s. So bring it back to the actual thing we're supposed to be talking about. All right, so Charisma, go ahead and correct these essays, return them to us corrected, write a new set. Let me know if you have any questions about my comments, and I'll be waiting to see what you write for us the next time. Good luck.